Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss Keir Starmer's statement today on his views of not just the battle between the Tories and SNP over the gender reform bill, but the most controversial aspect of its self-identification. After what I've said were some pretty questionable changes of policy on this from Labour, what Starmer has presented today is actually very good. Not specifically on the policy, but on the general attitude towards differences north and south of the border. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, very brief background for those who don't really know what all the fuss is about with the Scottish Gender Reform Bill. It was passed by Holyrood with support from MSPs in all 5 parties in the Scottish Parliament, including the Conservatives. The majority of Conservative MSPs voted against it, sure, but some supported it. In fact, the only other party to vote against it was the SNP. Same party who created it. But the point is that it had cross-party support, including enthusiastic support from Labour. At the time, you would just say Labour, Scottish Labour as well as UK Labour. Now that policy has changed. Rishi Sunak decided he didn't like it and he's overruled Holyrood. In reality, I don't think he really cares. I think he just wanted a political battle. Now, there are some reserved matters, of course, on which Holyrood cannot legislate without Westminster because you need something for cohesion in certain areas for a nation to work. However, I get the impression that independent legal experts are not really convinced that Sunak has a winning argument here. But that will be for the courts to decide in time. Humza Yousaf is pursuing the bill and Sunak remains opposed. But Keir Starmer has today said that Sunak is abusing the situation. Now, although he's blaming both the SNP and the Conservatives for the row, his shots are essentially aimed at the Conservatives here. He said that the powers which Sunak is using to overrule Holyrood here, which is Section 35 of the Scotland Act 1998, for those keeping score, were not intended to just block decision making, but to promote collaboration. So let's look at what Section 35 actually says is a valid reason for blocking Holyrood in this way. The first would be if it's breaching international obligations. Obviously, this does not apply. The second is if it would harm defence or national security. Again, no. The third is if it would have an adverse effect on the operation of the law on reserved matters. Now, equality legislation is a reserved matter, but note it doesn't say if it's to do with a reserve, one of these reserve matters. It says specifically if it would have an adverse effect on the operation of the law on reserve matters. So for Sunak to be able to block it, he'd have to convince the courts that this gender reform bill would make it more difficult to apply the UK-wide equalities legislation. But it has never been made clear to me how the gender reform bill will make the operation of the Equalities Act 2010 more difficult. Of course, I'm not a legal expert, but if the Tories had a point, I would have thought someone would have explained it by now. Still, we can see what the court case is when it's eventually heard and decided, I suppose. But back to Starmer, and he is essentially suggesting that if Sunak had a problem, he should have engaged with the Scottish Parliament and worked on a compromise. Instead, he just allowed the legislative process to proceed, and then once it had been completed, blocked it. In other words, political games, another outlet for his culture wars. So beyond just having a pop at the Tories and the SNP for squabbling, what is Starmer proposing would be different with a Westminster Labour government? Well, he used the opportunity to push for his UK Council of Nations and Regions. Now, there is a sort of body in existence now. It's called the Joint Ministerial Committee. However, Sunak's not really engaging with it. In fact, he should have engaged with it with the gender reform bill, but he didn't. He's not having meetings. They're not taking place right now. The committee really, it's a way of encouraging dialogue, but if the Prime Minister won't engage with it, nothing happens. It doesn't make decisions in itself. Labour's proposal is part of Starmer's plan to remove a lot of decision making from Westminster, from central government especially, and give devolved national but also regional leaders more of a say. Another thing which Starmer mentioned today, which is very much in line with this attitude towards decentralising decision making, but also prepares more stable political ground, is on the specific issue of self-identification here. So this was agreed in the gender reform bill. As I said, Scottish Labour very supportive of it and still are. UK Labour were supportive, not so much now. Naturally, this is unhelpful because you've got Scottish Labour campaigning and then UK Labour change a position. They go, oh dear, this isn't helping, Keir. This isn't helping. So, because it allows political opponents to point at confusion on policy, albeit a policy which does not feature in general election decisions in this particular case. But Starmer's now said he's not in favour of self-identification for England and Wales. Now, whether that's the right policy is something for people to debate. Obviously, a lot of people would say, no, the gender reform bill was actually quite good. But the point is, he's not saying that there should be a one nation approach to it. He's saying, look, if attitudes in Scotland are different to England and Wales, why shouldn't they have a different system? He's essentially said there is no problem with Scottish Labour supporting self-identification, even when Starmer is saying as Prime Minister he would not introduce it in the rest of Britain. But he has said he would, as Prime Minister, he suggested he would not block the Scottish Parliament legislating for it because he's criticised Sunak for doing so. He would just legislate differently outside of Scotland. And the particular policy aside, this is actually a really strong political position to take. Because like looking at it from an electoral strategy point of view, there are, of course, going to be different attitudes to important areas of policies around the country. The whole point of devolution was to take account of this. Without this clear position, there would always be a risk that UK Labour would have to adopt a policy which is in tune with the vast majority of target seats, which are, of course, in England, but which works against their efforts to win also crucial seats in Scotland. Well, Labour can now make sure they're providing for both sides of the border. Keir Starmer adopts a policy that target voters in England approve of, but those in Scotland don't. Not a problem, says Sanwar, the Scottish Labour leader. We have a different view, and we will support the opposite policy in Scotland. Well, how's that going to work then? Well, we'll promote it through Holyrood, and Starmer is not going to block us unless it is actually on something that is a clearly reserved area. And he said in this particular case, he would not block it. So there's no conflict. Starmer not only wants devolved decision-making to be respected, but he actually wants more of it. He said as much some time ago. If Scotland wants something different, then with the obvious provisos of issues that have to be national, then you go for it. And we'll do this thing in England and maybe Wales. Although you would imagine that Welsh devolution would also be strengthened, because I see absolutely no reason why at the moment, Wales doesn't have as many devolved areas as Scotland, but there's no reason why that should be the case. No reason why Wales shouldn't be able to decide as many matters as Scotland does. So this, I think, after a wobbly few weeks from Labour, is a good position. It makes sense. It works strategically. I hope they communicate it properly, because I can't really fault it. He's already made a big deal of his overriding reform aims being to stop a one-size-fits-all central approach to the vast majority of decisions being made, because when you make those decisions in London, guess who benefits? You know, this position fits exactly into his vision of decentralising decision-making. And it means Scottish Labour don't have to conflict in order to meet the needs of their voters because of some very different views in the Midlands of England, say. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.